Is this the year Michigan overtakes Ohio State? Why and why not? Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down Michigan football. And the best way I know how to do that is to bring on Steve Dace from Michigan Podcast, lock in on any of the audio platforms and just look up Michigan Podcast or go to YouTube and do the very same. Of course, you can lock in right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, with the best analysis, discussion, and debate on a daily basis. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm well, Mark. How you doing?
I am doing just fine. We appreciate you stopping by, talking Michigan football. And let's start with this. Spring practice is complete in regards to storylines. What did you take from what was accomplished or needed to be accomplished on the field?
Well, I think you have to learn, and I had to learn this after years of covering the sport professionally and then being a fan that is obsessed with it on another level, that you have to know what spring practice is. And spring practice is really when the basic identity of a team is forged. I have never, in any team I've ever covered or any team I've ever followed, I've never seen a team whose basic identity in the spring was not who they were in the fall. Now, I didn't say how good they were going to be. That's not what I said. All right. But the identity or the foundation of how they will determine how good they are is determined now. I mean, and you've seen that in recent years at Michigan. You go back to the 2017 spring game. And what did we see in that spring game? The defense didn't look like it was going to miss a step with all those guys off to the NFL. Looked like Devin Bush, Rashawn Gary, these guys looked like they were ready to go. Michigan couldn't protect the quarterback. Wilton Speight couldn't hit a downfield throw. Is that not exactly what the 2017 season was for Michigan? And I could do this for a lot of teams, So what I'm looking at for Michigan is I want to know is what we were sold was going to happen with Josh Gaddis, the new offensive coordinator. Is that the identity that we got to see? And boy, howdy, it was. And they made no bones about it. They went out of their way to once and for all. It's almost like Jim Harbaugh is sick of hearing, "I believe it when I see it." It's like he wanted to make a point, Mark. I'm not coordinating the offense. All right. I'm going to take on more of the traditional college CEO coach. All right. And I'm going to delegate this authority on play calling and schematics to Josh Gaddis. And you really saw from the very beginning, Michigan run a dramatically different offense than what we have seen the last few years under Coach Harbaugh.
So when it comes down to what's going to be called in crucial situations and is going to be the foundation of the offense in 2019, do you expect that to be full sell out to the approach that we saw? Or is that going to mix the two? And how is that going to play out?
Well, I think it will be a full out to the approach we just saw, but I think it'll be situationally amended. I mean, Josh comes from Alabama, and so, if Nick Saban needs to run a 4-minute offense, he's going to tell his team, we're not running tempo right now. We need to run a 4-minute offense and get out of here with a win, right? So, I mean, I don't think you're going to see them running tempo, trying to kill clock with 6 minutes to go in a fourth quarter. It'll be situational when needed to be. And here's one of the reasons why I think this is important is because there's also been a lot of debate at Michigan after what happened against Ohio State about Don Brown's defense. And there really has only been a few games where Michigan's defense under Don Brown has not put forth dominant performances. They just also have to be against teams that recruit as good or better than we do. And so there's a question about Don Brown's defense and all this man-to-man we play. Can it really stop teams that recruit? I mean, you look at what Ohio State's receivers did at the combine. I mean, Johnny Knox didn't get drafted. He ran like a 4.42 at the combine. There are some years that have been the fastest run for a receiver at the combine. Okay. And he didn't get picked. He was like their 4th or 5th guy last year. Right. So the question is, can you stop all those guys? And I don't, and should Michigan play more zone? I'm fine with the aggressive man-to-man defense Don Brown plays if we amend the offense, and here's why. One of the things that Jimmy brought from the NFL that I do think we need to see more of in college is complementary football. And if you're going to play man-to-man, you'll notice we haven't lost a lot of games to teams that we're clearly better than. Take out the Iowa game in 2016. We went in there on a Saturday night, number 2 in the country. Iowa's pulled a ton of upsets in that stadium over the years. But if you go look at Michigan's losses the last 4 years, you're not going to see a whole lot of games where Michigan lost to somebody they shouldn't have lost to. And that was even in the apex of the Lloyd Carr era. There was always that one game. What are we losing that team for? Why are we losing to Jim Coletto's Purdue team? Why are we doing that? So we don't do that too much anymore. And I think Don Brown's defense has a lot to do with it because of all the man-to-man we play. It really puts the superior athletes that we recruit to most of the Big Ten, puts them in a position where the other team's not going to out-scheme us now. Their guys have to get open. Indiana's guys have to get open. Minnesota's guys have to get open. Maryland's guys have to get open, and they can't most of the time. So on one hand, we're doing a much better job of putting down the teams that we were losing to mystifyingly for years. Now the question is, what do we do with teams, though, that have the athletes that not even a Lavert Hill or David Long can cover these guys 30 times? Well, I think the best option to do, frankly, is you need a more explosive offense so that if you need 40 or 50 points to win a game, and some people, particularly if you're an Ohio State fan watching this, well, you scored 39 against us and still lost. Yeah, we scored 39, but if you watch that game, a lot of that was in garbage time after the game was over, okay? I mean, to me, if you want to know when that game was lost, the opening possessions of the third quarter, so Michigan gets that quirky series of events. They get the 2 touchdowns in the last 5 minutes. They're within 1 score at halftime, and I'm walking in there thinking, we dodged a bullet. We got out of there, got through the crowd, everything. All we got to do is just get back to our game, right? We get a 3-and-out to start the second half. We get the ball back. Here's what we do. We run twice for nothing against a 75-man front. And then on third down, for reasons only Allah knows, Shea Patterson goes turns his back to the line of scrimmage to run some play action 17-step drop pass and gets sacked. We were never in the game again after that. After that is when Ohio State went on the run. All right. So if we're going to play this defense that stomps out the teams that we're better than, so they can't out scheme us or catch us flat, then when we get to the teams that can expose this, I think we need an offense that can say, in a competitive game, can we walk out of there winning 45-42? This is the evolution Nick Saban made the last few years at Alabama, and you've seen how it's paid off for them. All right. And I think you're finally seeing Jim Harbaugh make this evolution now at Michigan.
And for as much as I don't like to see it, because for me to consume 101 points in an Ohio State-Michigan game is tough to digest when I'm used to 14-6 and 14-3 from the late 70s. But maybe some balance between the two. What we saw in the 80s when the Jim Harbaughs and the Chris Carters emerged on both sides, and there was some playmaking, but still the 24-21 variety seems to be what I was comfortable with. But hey, it's taken off, and you touch upon one of the items that makes Nick Saban so great is he adjusts. He may not like it, but he has adjusted very well. Recruiting has been something that we've touched upon a number of times from the standpoint of, if you really look at any metric of the program, Jim Harbaugh, and people don't like to hear this, but it is the truth, has decidedly upgraded the standards of the program from both talent acquisition, production on the field, and of course, results. Not necessarily in the big games against the big opponents, as was outlined here by you, but by all metrics, it's a better program today than it was in 2014. But the perception is, again, that and you outlined this very well in regards to the penthouse analogy of Michigan being on the brink, and for some of the other schools like a Stanford and Notre Dame, they've been pushed off at times, and it's not been pretty in terms of trying to play with the big boys over an extended period of time. So where does the recruiting, not specifically to a recruit, but the recruiting stand in regards to what the vibe is, the perception out there, and how do you think that's being received now after another disappointing finish?
Well, last year they had this incoming class in 2019. They had a tremendous class. It's considered the best in the Big Ten. I think it's the first time in 11 years that Ohio State didn't finish with the best recruiting class in the Big Ten. So this was a very good class they brought in. They actually recruited some guys, which further cements that Harbaugh is buying in on this, because even before they brought in Josh Gaddis, Jim had signed in December several guys like Mike Sanderstill, who you saw really highlighted in the spring game, Giles Jackson, who's your classic slot player, in-space player out of the state of California, George Johnson, who's another one of these guys out of Florida. He'd already signed 3 of these guys in one class, and they were all signed in December, a good month and a half or so before Josh Gaddis came to town. So that already showed you that Jim was planning on evolving more to this after seeing particularly what Urban Meyer's done to him. Really, the whole Jim Harbaugh and the big game thing, it really comes down to the big game. And I'm really fascinated when I listen to people like Barrett Sallee at CBS Sports, and I think Barrett does great work overall. But I'm fascinated why he thinks he should be more pissed off about Michigan's record against Ohio State than me. I'm the freaking 36-year Michigan fan. All right. So that when a guy who has no ties to the school at all right, it gets more upset about what a school is doing than the fans do. That kind of tells me maybe he's got a personal axe to grind with the coach in this case. That being said, it's a pooper get off the pot year for Michigan, but Harbaugh is 38-10 against everybody in college football not named Urban Meyer. I mean, that's 81%. That's really good. Okay. So if you think about really, it's really been Urban Meyer. If you take Urban Meyer away, even if Jim is 2-2 against Urban Meyer, if he's 1-3 against Urban Meyer, particularly if it's 2016 or he's in the playoffs in one of those seasons, our entire look at this of what's happening here is dramatically different. Okay, so, but that also, by the way, that also puts, I think, a lot more pressure on Jimmy for this fall because the Urban Meyer factor is gone. And there have been a lot of changes at Ohio State. You have a coach that, a lot of us didn't know who this guy was when he was on the 49ers staff 4 years ago. And now it's clear that Ohio State is trying to kind of catch the Oklahoma Lightning in a bottle, find their own Lincoln Riley, if you will. And so if, Justin Fields, I don't think looked great in the spring game. And I don't want to hear, well, it was just a spring game. The point is that's set up to be a showcase. Ryan Day is an offensive guy. He's going in there with the intent of Ryan Day doesn't want to read stories for the next 6 months about Justin Fields other than a 98-yard touchdown pass going 3 for 13 for 33 yards in the spring game. Okay. So with everything setting up for Michigan, you kind of get, the notion that if they're not going to do it this year, you wonder when. But, from knowing this rivalry, this has been a rivalry that, with the exception of the 10-year war that was 5-4-1, with that exception, and really that extended into Earl Bruce versus Bo Schembechler, which was pretty even most of those years as well. Other than, I guess we could even just say then the Schembechler era, when this was pretty much a 50-50 rivalry under Earl Bruce and Woody Hayes. The history of this rivalry has actually been wide swings of dominance one way or the other. Now, we just so happen to be in the biggest swing of dominance probably since Ohio State really established their program when Michigan was one of the grandfathers of college football a century ago. We're in one of those right now, but I'm reminded of what Hayden Fry, when I used to cover Iowa and Iowa State football professionally, I'm reminded of what Hayden Fry, the old Iowa coach, said when he won his 15th game in a row against Iowa State. And he was asked afterwards, are you ever going to lose to the Cyclones? And he said, every year you beat a team in a row just increases the odds that sooner or later they're going to get over on you. Sure enough, after Iowa won its 15th in a row, Iowa State won the next 5 in a row in that rivalry. And if you ask most Iowa fans what their biggest criticism of Kirk Ferentz is, you know what it is? We've lost too much to Iowa State. Okay, so if you would have told Michigan fans in 1999, hey, you're coming up on a time when you're going to win 1 out of 15 against Ohio State, we'd have had all y'all drug tested, and that's kind of been the history of this rivalry.
Yes, and it's good for maybe some younger fans to hear that because it's just unforeseeable what you're talking about, but we have seen it time and time again over the last 40 years. It just didn't happen this last change in coaches between Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer. I know Luke Fickell factored in there, but it was basically a transition between Tressel and Meyer, and they were able to, Ohio State, maintain that continuity, and we'll see if they can do it with Ryan Day. So, Steve, when we look at the playoff predictor, this is something that I don't normally put much stock in, nor do I even look at it. But it was thrown in my face by several people. Therefore, I gave it a glance. And what really stood out to me was Michigan 41%, Ohio State 6% at chance to make the playoff. I had a few people do some research for me without me asking and let me know, because my big question was, of course, what is the playoff predictor forecasted in previous off seasons, and how accurate has it been, especially considering that most of us, even with a periphery knowledge of what's happening in college football, can pick two of the four slots and then take about the other two
Right.
and say, we got about 4 or 5 teams we could throw out there: Ohio State, Oklahoma, etc., Georgia, and grab 2 of those, and we should get 2 out of 3 pretty easily. So it's not a difficult process like the NBA has been the past 5 or 6 seasons. So when you see 41%, 6%, I know it's a Harbaugh Patterson factor versus Day and Fields, but it seems to be a largely out of kilter.
Well, if you look at the algorithm that ESPN uses for their playoff predictor, one of the things that it heavily undervalues is transfers who don't have a proven record of productivity at their former school. Okay, so Justin Fields in his recruiting profile is really not factored into ESPN, because these are odds that come from ESPN FPI's rankings and projections, right? So ESPN's FPI just has almost no opinion on Justin Fields whatsoever, unlike when Shea Patterson came to Michigan, because we saw him for basically a season and 2/3 in Oxford, averaging almost 300 yards passing a game in the SEC. We have no body of work for Justin Fields. He played a couple of mop-up situations early in the year. They did a little bit of rotating to keep him happy. And then we really didn't see him again until they put him on that ill-fated punt fake in the SEC championship game. So there's no body of work there. I think that's going too far when you look at Ryan Day's track record, and then you look at and I think you need to give Ryan Day a good amount of the credit for what happened with Dwayne Haskins this past year and his development. And I thought he was the number 1 quarterback in the draft. So I think that's going too far negative when you look at Ryan Day's record. But I think just assuming because he was a 5-star, he'll come in here right away and dominate, is going too far the other way. So, the truth with these kinds of things is typically somewhere in the middle. And in terms of the playoff predictor, for Michigan, the advantage that we have this year is the 3 rivalry games are all at home. Michigan State, Notre Dame, and Ohio State are all at home. And if you look at the sort of the rhythm of the schedule and the way that it sets up, Michigan started right away last year with that road game at night in South Bend, the green out, that atmosphere. Shea Patterson hadn't played football in basically a year. Going into that hostile environment, they clearly weren't ready. John Runyon, Michigan's left tackle, got absolutely abused by Jerry Tillery and Notre Dame's defensive front all game. But by the end of the year, John Runyon Jr. was the all Big Ten left tackle last year. So you saw that's just one example of Michigan's growth as a team throughout the course of the year. This year, the way the schedule sets up for Michigan, it really kind of begins. It kind of has a rhythm to it. It kind of peaks week after week. So it opens with a clear warm-up game against Middle Tennessee. You bring Army in the following week, and that'll be a difficult preparation, of course. But this year we have the kind of offense where we don't have to hold them to 17 points or 21 points to win that game. I mean, if they hit us for a couple of big plays because our young guys on defense over pursue, I'm not sure with the athletes we have on offense how many times Army's defense is going to stop us. Then you have the bye week and then the road game at Wisconsin. But Wisconsin's roster has been decimated this offseason with attrition. Everybody talks about, well, they'll just replace those offensive linemen. I don't know that they will. I mean, they brought back those 4 guys last year on their offensive line. The best they produced was a 7-5 record. So if I'm going to play Wisconsin, who I think is going to end up starting Graham Mertz, the freshman at quarterback, and I have to play them on the road, I want to play them in early September with a freshman quarterback. That's like the best situation you could ask for, except for maybe Barry Alvarez never going to Madison. That's the best situation you could ask for to play a road game at Wisconsin. And just the rest of the schedule kind of builds that way where there's a rhythm to it that allows you to kind of keep improving as a team. And then the crescendo is in November with the games against Michigan State and Ohio State. So I love the way that Michigan's schedule sets up this year. I don't really see I do think there's a couple of back-to-back road games. I think at Penn State, who I think has suffered more attrition than any team I've ever seen, Mark, that wasn't on probation or didn't have a coaching change. I've never seen anything like what's going on there. And you can tell, like even the Tommy Stevens situation, they didn't know it was coming. Because if you go back and watch the Penn State spring game, because I'm the nerd that watched that, okay? Watch the Penn State spring game, you've got Matt Millen on there, former Penn State All-American, doing it for the Big Ten Network. And he's talking about being at Penn State spring practice the last week, and the job is really set up for Tommy Stevens. He's the anointed one. They're just waiting for his foot to get healthy. They would not have had their boy on Big Ten Network building Tommy Stevens up, only to find out the day after he was transferring from school. Okay, something's not right there. I don't know what it is, but there's something culturally going on there that I think has largely gone overlooked this college football offseason. So if you're going to play a year to have to go there and play in the whiteout, and frankly, their whiteout record's actually not that great. It's only like 500. But if you're going to play in that environment, again, I'd rather play them this year with how young they are, the attrition they have, the uncertainty at quarterback. I just really like the way Michigan's schedule sets up.
Steve Dace, Michigan Podcast. You get a small slice of what you can enjoy there by looking it up on YouTube right here, and also the various audio platforms. Michigan Podcast with Steve Dace. Next time we have you on, Steve, I'm going to hit you with a number of questions that are a fun off-season topic. Best wins, most exhilarating, most excruciating losses. What would you change about the program? What would you change about the Big Ten nationally? Best player, favorite player, all those things. We'll have a fun discussion on that. Also, I don't know if you have anything else to say on this topic, because even though I didn't serve up the question, I think you covered it. But if you have anything else in regards to why this is the year Michigan overtakes Ohio State and why not?
Well, I think this is where we find out. I was just looking at Michigan's draft class for next year potentially. And, I think they led college football in most guys drafted 2 years ago off the 2016 team. I think it's possible we could have 16 guys, again, selected, depending on who comes out early or not, in the 2020 draft. They have 4 full classes under Coach Harbaugh. They're loaded. They're pretty much too deep at every single position. Right now, Michigan's biggest questions are, and they've got one starting spot at safety up for grabs, and they're waiting for the number 1 safety prospect in the country to report in June to battle for that job. And then the rest of us are really just talking largely about backups. There's some questions at running back with some guys suspended and beat up, but I think that's less of a premium position now with going to the more wide open passing attack we're going to have. And plus we've got good young players there like Christian Turner and Zach Charbonnet we've recruited. This is the strongest offensive line and strongest depth on the offensive line Michigan has had since Lloyd Carr left. So we're going back more than a decade now. And the schedule is favorable. And, Ohio State's never not going to be very good. If you look at traditionally, Mark, all of the major powers, Notre Dame had its down period. Penn State went through a period, even pre-Sandusky, where they had 3 losing seasons in 4 years under Joe Paterno in the early 2000s. Alabama had its lost era. Mike DeBose, Mike Shula, Ray Perkins, these guys. Every major power, Florida State's going through it right now. Every major power but one has had a down cycle post in the last 50 years. And the only school that hasn't is Ohio State. They've had 2 really down seasons, and they still went to bowl games. 1 year 5-6. That was in 1999. That ended the John Cooper era, or almost ended the John Cooper era. And then the Luke Fickell year. I mean, that they've had a down year here or there. The 87 team that was preseason top 5, they got Earl Bruce fired and went 6-4-1. So they've had a down year here and there, but they've never had a downturn. And I don't see that changing. They've got more demographic advantages than any school in our conference does. Their tradition is on par, some would say better, depending on your perspective, than any program in the country other than Michigan's. So they're never going to have a downturn, okay? But it's unlikely we're ever going to see them have another era like what they just had. The Big Ten right now is as deep as I can ever remember, with the resources being devoted to it. And they just said goodbye to a coach who I think lost 4 regular season games in the league in 7 years. That's incredible. I mean, Ryan Day could have a college football Hall of Fame coaching career and not come anything close to that. There's really only one place for Ohio State to go, right down.
Because I think it's shortchanged.
Great eras of all time.
At least based on the feedback that I receive and the comments that I get, and I don't know how it stands with you, but because of the gold medal mindset that most fans have, that if you're number 2, you're nobody.
Sure.
That and with the Alabama dominance being what it is, and Urban Meyer certainly laid the proverbial egg twice that cost him a playoff spot, and had some bad luck against him, and I won't go into details, but so forth. That the end of the season could have been much better in regards to either the way they played or them being given an opportunity that they were not, to make that even more sterling. But to win 91% of your games is just astounding.
Ryan Day's not going to do that, Mark, because no one has ever done that. There's 2 guys that have ever come in close to that post World War II. 3, Frank Leahy, Bear Bryant, and Nick Saban, and Urban Meyer. That's about it. He's the 4th. He's not going to come anything close to that. If he only wins 81% of his games, and I said only, that's first ballot college football Hall of Fame stuff. That's also an extra 1.5 losses a year. Okay.
Yeah, that makes the difference.
And that makes a big difference in a playoff era when you're not sharing. And by the way, we're not sharing conference titles anymore either. Okay. So you had several years where Michigan and Ohio State would share titles or share titles with other teams. There aren't any more shared titles. We're now in a playoff era. There is a huge difference between going 10-2 and 11-1, 9-3 and 10-2. Huge differences in terms of which bowl game you get, more than we've ever seen before. And so there is no way, even if Ryan Day is everything Ohio State fans believe he is, there's no way he's measuring up to that, because that would just be you can't do better than arguably the best coaching resume in the last 50 years. You can't do better than that.
Yeah, it's going to come down to the evaluation being, does he continue to beat the rival? And that doesn't mean every year. Ohio State fans, listen to this. Michigan is going to beat Ohio State. I don't know if it's in 2019 or 2020, but it's not far off. Michigan will win that game, and then they may win a number of games after that, but they will win a game. And so Ryan Day needs to be evaluated based on that game and then seizing the opportunities to win championships. It's not going to be 11-1 every year like Urban Meyer knocked out. That is a tough thing to hold him to. But when he has that opportunity, one every 3 or 4 years, win the Big Ten half the time, get to a playoff a third to a half of the time, and then seize that opportunity to maybe win a national championship or 2 over the span of 12 years or so.
Yeah, I was a State fan. I don't know why you wouldn't take what you just said right now. If I told you that was going to be his next 12 years, I mean, that's greatness. That's greatness. I think I looked this up. I'll leave you with this. I think you and I talked about this even a few months ago. I looked this up, and in the last 50 years, I want to say Ohio State has won something like 73% of its games or something. Since Woody Hayes' first national title team, which I think is around 1951 or something like that, I want to say they've won close to 73% of their games or some crazy number like that. Okay. And then you mentioned what Urban Meyer's winning percentage is. So really Ryan Day, and thus the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, because this could have a big say in what I'm about to say. Ryan Day is going to be judged by what does he do between the numbers 73 and that number that you just gave with Urban Meyer. That's what he's going to be judged by. And what Jim Harbaugh and Michigan do will have a big say in somewhere between those 2 data points where Ryan Day lands in the end.
Nobody is questioning Nick Saban's performance over the last 7 seasons. Some people question Urban Meyer's, but they have the same number of losses. Nick Saban has been fortunate at times to be given an opportunity in the playoff. Other times they have simply seized the opportunity and completed the mission, as opposed to Ohio State failing in certain spots. But I would certainly love to have you along with me at times when I have to respond. And I'm trying to cover this sport neutrally. But to have to defend Urban Meyer and his 3 national championships and 91% winning percentage at Ohio State and the third best winning percentage in modern college football history going back prior to World War II, just because he lost to Iowa and lost to Purdue. Everybody loses games. It's tough to do.
Yeah, what I mean, I don't know the Ohio State fan base as well as you do. I think they could go 9-3 this year. I think that's entirely possible.
Sure.
What are people going to do if they go 9-3? I mean, I don't know. I don't know how they would handle that, you know?
And more level-headed folks should be able to evaluate and say, let's look at not just the results on the field in the win-loss column, but did Ryan Day, how did the team look? Or is he developing talent, recruiting talent, doing those things? Let's not get out the noose quite yet, but there will be many that will have that mindset.
You said it good.
All right, Steve, we appreciate you stopping by. It's always a good discussion. You have yourself a great day.
Thank you, Mark. You too, man. Take care.